Good morning and welcome to our live Sunday school class for December the 26th of 2020. I hope everybody had a wonderful and Merry Christmas yesterday, and I hope you have a Happy New Year coming up this week as well. It's been pretty cold here in North Carolina, so I hope you've all been staying warm. Depending on what part of the country or the world you're in right now, you may be really cold like we are here in North Carolina. We even had a little snow here in Dobson, North Carolina for Christmas Eve and into our Christmas morning a little bit. So I know all of us local folks here probably really enjoyed that for the Christmas season. I hope you've all had a blessed season as we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ this time of year. What a most beautiful and special time of year it is to celebrate and fellowship with each other. I'm sure we've all been spending a lot of time and a lot of wonderful, precious time with our families and our loved ones this time of year, and I know how much each of us enjoy that and exchanging gifts with one another and just celebrating the birth of Christ together. It's such a special time of year, isn't it? And thank you for joining us this morning, this really cold Saturday morning. I think our little weather station thing, I checked the low on it this morning. It said it got down to 15 degrees last night. So that is pretty cool here. I think that's pretty cool for anybody, wherever you live at in the world. That's getting down there, isn't it? So I hope you are staying warm, and thanks for joining us for our live Sunday school lesson. We got a really interesting topic this morning. We were talking about joy, embracing joy on our last lesson as we were approaching Christmas then. And today we're going to change gears a little bit. We're going to go on the opposite side of that coin, and we're going to talk about anger today. Many of us sometimes can get really angry, can't we, or have a lot of road rage. I know when I myself was younger, in my teenage years, I probably had a little bit of a temper myself. I didn't have a lot of patience. That's something we have to learn, isn't it? Is patience and maturity and redirecting our anger. We all have an issue with that here and there, don't we, with our anger? And we're going to talk about redirecting our anger. I think anymore, I probably get more frustrated than I do angry. I don't like to get angry. I think it's a really terrible feeling. So I'd really try to avoid confrontation myself. Anger is not a emotion that I express very often, but I know some people have a lot of anger built up in them, and they express it, or they have a lot of road rage. And or maybe you got a bike. Maybe some of the children this year got a bike for Christmas, and it looks like we got a child here upset and angry, don't we, on his bicycle that maybe they got for their birthday or Christmas, or maybe a parent or grandparent gave it to them. So that's a interesting picture, isn't it, to think about and look at together. So our question number one here this Saturday morning: when you were a kid, what would make you really angry when you were a kid? Well, I know what it was for me because I love Nintendo and Super Mario, still do. And when that would get taken away when I was a kid, that would make me really angry and sad and upset. But I'm sure you had things too. Maybe you probably still do today, have things that kind of push your button, or hit your anger spot. But a bicycle here that a child's trying to ride, maybe he's not wanting to share it or something. A lot of kids get mad about that or struggle with that, don't they? Like sharing their toys. We learn that, don't we? Those qualities, don't we? At a young age, we don't want to share, or he's probably not listening to his mom or his dad there, or an adult figure in their life. That's something we have to be careful with, isn't it? Is our anger. So think there for a moment yourself. I'm sure you can think of many things when you were a child that would make you really angry. Probably candy or something too. Kids always love candy and snacks, and they always want to eat them, don't they? Usually at a bad time before dinner or supper, or when they're supposed to be having a big meal. So that usually makes children mad as well, doesn't it? They want that candy and put their hand in the cookie jar or something. And, it ain't time for that. We gotta eat. We gotta eat first. You gotta eat before you have dessert. Have to teach our children those things, don't we? So the point of today's lesson: take your anger to God and leave matters in His hands. That's what we're to do, ain't it? Just leave it in God's hands. Ain't no need to get upset. Ain't no need to get mad, is there? Just leave it with God. And that's how we should live, isn't it? Be peaceful. Be peaceful and joyful with one another. I know we all strive to do that, don't we? It's not always easy, is it? Things in this life aggravate us or frustrate us. I guess the biggest things for me as an adult is I don't like to see injustice, people being treated unfairly or not equally, or like human beings, like especially during, at work and stuff, maybe at your company, seems like certain ones get placed on a pedestal or get certain privileges, that you aren't allowed or don't get for whatever reason. I guess those are the things that probably frustrate people the most, inequality, things of that nature. But we shouldn't worry about those things, should we? We don't worry about things we can't control. Leave it in God's hands. And that's important, isn't it? You can't bottle anger up inside, can you? Because it'll just eat away at you and eat away at you. Let those things go. Just leave it in God's hands and just worry about the things that you can do right and can control. Because we can't really control that much, can we, in this walk of life? The passages today, we will be in Psalms. So be finding your place there. We will be in Psalms chapter 35 and verses 1 through 3 and also verses 13 through 18. So we'll start with our story here this really cold Saturday morning. The Bible meets life. Small children can get mad about the silliest things, can't they? Well, adults can too. I was hearing a story from a family member the other day. They was fussing over a glass of milk or something, how full it was. So even small things can make adults mad as well, which is really kind of comical sometimes, isn't it? But it can. Sometimes the smallest things can set people off. You just don't know what kind of day they're having, do you? And if they catch us giggling, they only get madder. So that can make children mad too, can it? Just laughing at them or giggling at them about why they're mad. Parents report their children have gotten mad because the moon was in the sky during the day. Her picture wasn't in our wedding album. His ice cream was too cold. Or I wouldn't let him wipe his nose with a piece of bread. Unfortunately, we also can get angry as adults, can't we? Not just the children, but as adults we can get angry. And for equally silly reasons that we were just discussing about. Someone chews his or her food too loudly. Maybe that bothers you. I know people that does bother. Or maybe you're chewing with your mouth open. Someone in front of you is driving too slowly. That's probably a big one. A lot of people have road rage, don't they? Someone asked a question that was just answered moments ago. That one frustrates me a lot at work. I guess you answer somebody's question or you give them something and they ask you for it again like a little bit later and you're thinking, darn, I just gave that to you, didn't I? That one can be very frustrating. Someone puts you on hold for longer than a minute. We've all done that before, haven't we? Calling in for get something done on the phone or maybe waiting in line at a doctor's office or something. You have to wait for hours and hours. That can make you mad, can it? Or can frustrate you. But admit it. You've become angry over something petty, just like I have. At other times, more serious matters push the anger button. Slander, threats, and unjust actions. That's the one that bothers me, I guess, the most. Unjust actions, people being treated unjustly. Do we give in to the anger, or is there a better way? In Psalms chapter 35, David had good reasons to be angry. Sometimes we do have a good reason, don't we, to be angry. But he took a different route. It's a route we should consider when anger starts to well up inside us. The setting today, the imprecatory Psalms are one category in the collection that deal with personal hurt and anger in our lives, and with the desire that God bring immediate retribution. Modern believers understand these Psalms are pre-Christian, since they don't fully reflect the ethic taught by Jesus of Nazareth. However, the Psalms teach us to bring all feelings and emotions to God as the means to rid ourselves of destructive anger. Anger can be very destructive, can it? And to find assurance of His presence and concern for us. We have to be careful with anger, don't we? If you let it dwell and build like a volcano erupting, that's what happens, isn't it? We shouldn't dwell on anger. Don't let anger fill our hearts. Now, let's touch on those first verses here this morning. We will start in Psalms chapter 35 and verses 1 through 3. We'll pull them up on screen for you here as well. Psalms chapter 35 and verses 1 through 3. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler, and stand up for mine help. Draw out also the spear, and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am the salvation. The writer here in verse 1 of Psalms chapter 35, the writer found himself in anguish and deep trouble and felt alone in his pain. You ever feel like that? Do you ever feel alone in your pain? He used the language of the battlefield, though it's unclear if he was on an actual battlefield and in mortal danger at the time. The psalm is identified as part of the Davidic collection. David was a soldier and understood the battlefield. It may be that David began to record these thoughts when he was pursued by King Saul and was labeled an enemy of the state. Certainly, this accusation was unjust and untrue, and we can well imagine how David longed for vindication. Perhaps the situation is of a different nature entirely, and David felt the burden of accusation and isolation due to other causes and simply used the language of the battlefield to communicate the severity of his plight. Whatever the case, the writer did an appropriate thing by bringing his plan to the Lord in prayer. He believed God cared for him, though he didn't understand why God allowed his current predicament. We don't always understand, do we? Venting our anger by bringing it to God is appropriate. It is one way to find release from the grip of anger. We can go to our place of prayer and express whatever we feel to God without believing we will offend Him, since He's big enough not to be offended by our brashness. Believers can be assured of God's constant attention to our needs, including any anger we might feel in our daily lives. A second observation here is that the concept of eternal judgment was evolving in the Old Testament. Since the Hebrews' understanding of bodily resurrection and final judgment wasn't the same as the assurance we have in the New Testament, David and his contemporaries generally believed that if judgment was to be meted out, it must be meted out in this life. A third observation is that we have no indication this writer took matters in his own hands. He didn't speak of attacking and crushing the enemy himself, did he? But trusted God to intervene in his place. We can bring our honest emotions to the Lord in prayer and trust Him to deal with us and our concerns properly. The burdens we face may come about when we believe we're all alone and don't have sufficient personal strength to prevail. In short, we feel the weight of our weakness. But burdens also can be our feelings of anger towards others who have hurt us. We have the assurance that bringing this anger to the Lord is an appropriate choice and a step of spiritual and emotional healing. The God we worship wants us to know His care in whatever situation we face in this world. He's promised never to leave us and never to forsake us. Don't you love that promise? Don't you love the promise that God will never leave us and never forsake us? No matter what we face in this world, no matter how angry we feel sometimes, God is there for us, isn't He? And His promise holds even when we experience anger, and no matter how great that anger is in our heart. Old Testament writers often had the concept of God as a victorious warrior who commanded armies. It is in this context that the writer spoke of God's shields for use in battle. Two different sized shields are referenced. The smaller is sometimes called a buckler, and the larger sometimes is referred to as armor. The Lord has the right equipment for every battle, doesn't He? No situation will find Him unaware and unguarded. He has the correct defenses in hand. David continued his battle reference when he spoke about the Lord's spear and javelin. The spear was considered a weapon for use at close range. Soldiers on the front line would thrust their spears towards areas of their enemy's vulnerability. But the javelin was more of a medium range weapon in battle. It could be thrown when one was removed from hand to hand combat. David would have been well acquainted with this particular weapon. The imagery of battle instruments is a way to understand the Lord's taking command and instituting judgment against those who threaten the righteous. Because the Lord is the commander-in-chief of heaven's army, He will be victorious, won't He? Ultimate deliverance is assured, for who can stand against the Lord? All enemies and all problems are subject to His dominion. David exhibited ultimate faith in the power of God to deliver him from all his battles, and appropriately took his anger and desire for vindication to God. When we get angry, we need to take it to God, don't we? Don't bottle it up inside, but take it to God and leave it to God and His will for our lives. Question number 2 here this Saturday morning. What's your first reaction to these verses that we just read? Or, an alternate question, what might keep us from being honest with God about our anger? Are we sometimes dishonest about our anger? Do we sometimes bottle it up inside of us and let it just build and build? What keeps you sometimes from being honest with God about your anger or your problems? Well, a lot of times we just think we can fix it, don't we? We think we get swelled up, don't we, in our pride, and we think we can fix it and we don't need God, but we do, don't we? Just cast all your cares upon the Lord, especially when we get angry. King David faced real and serious opposition. David likely penned Psalm chapter 35 during the period of his life when King Saul was pursuing him. After David's victory over Goliath, he quickly rose in popularity with the people in those days, as would naturally happen. He served in Saul's court, and he was successful in everything he did. David never sought to usurp King Saul, but that was not how Saul viewed David. It didn't help that the popular song of the day was, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. David had an easy opportunity to kill his enemy. Twice, actually, didn't he? On one occasion, Saul went to relieve himself in the very cave where David and his men were hiding. David crept up and cut off the corner of Saul's robe to prove that he could have harmed Saul, but he would never lift his hand against the one God had anointed. David took the matter to God. David didn't seek vengeance. He sought God. Read this psalm through verse 8, and you see a cry for David's opponents to be disgraced, humiliated, ashamed, and ruined. David expressed his anger and frustration to God, but he left the matter there. David surely knew what God saw in the law. Vengeance and retribution belong to me. The Lord will indeed vindicate His people. When we face opposition, and we all face opposition in this world, don't we? We should take our anger and desire for vindication to God. In the next verses here, we see that we should also treat others with love and grace, not anger. It's not always easy to do, is it? But that's what we're called to do. Don't treat others with anger or hatred, but with love and grace and kindness. Now let's touch on those next verses here this Saturday morning. Psalms chapter 35 and verses 13 through 16. Psalms chapter 35 and verses 13 through 16. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned into mine own bosom. I behaved myself as though he had been my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily, as one that mourneth for his mother. But in mine adversity they rejoiced, and gathered themselves together. Yea, the objects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me, and ceased not. With hypocritical mockers and feast, they gnashed upon me with their teeth. Interestingly, though, David spoke words of anger. His enemies received good treatment at his hand. He pleaded earlier that his enemies be disgraced, shamed, and driven away like chaff in the wind. But here he had expressed compassion. When his enemies were sick, he humbled himself on their behalf. He wore sackcloth and interceded for them. Sackcloth was a coarse garment, symbolic of discomfort and despondency. Wearing the garment reminded one of the pain for which he was concerned as he sought the Lord. David demonstrated his compassion by asking God for his enemies' healing when they were sick. This action contrasts to his previous request for the heavenly army to destroy those enemies. Humanity can be fickle and vacillate from one emotional polarity to another. Indeed, we often see the full range of human emotions in the Psalms, don't we? The writers were people, just like you and I. David used several images to enhance our understanding of his grief because of what his enemies faced at that moment. His grief caused him to react physically. He was bowed down with grief. It overpowered him when he saw the suffering. A second image was more relational. He grieved for those who suffered as though they were friends, not enemies. A higher ethic than at the beginning of the psalm here. David further declared he grieved and prayed for his enemies, as for his own family, his brother or mother. That's grieving, ain't it? One reason for David's disappointment, expressed in this psalm, was that his previous kindness was forgotten when he himself later faced difficulty. Alas, his kindness was not reciprocated. There came a time when he stumbled and found himself in need. And we'll all find ourselves in need at some point, won't we? The specifics are not explained. But those he befriended chose this occasion to heap criticism on him. Not only did they not humbly pray for him as he had done for them, but they gleefully delighted in his suffering. He didn't face the mockery of a single enemy, but many enemies. His opponents gathered as a group to mock him in chorus. Though some of them did not even know him, they were willing to join the chorus of mockery at the invitation of others, rather than from their personal experience with him. Of course, disdain like this is godless. God is not honored when people join with others to mock and hurt others. As sackcloth was a symbol of grief, so gnashing of teeth symbolized utter disdain in the Old Testament. To gnash means to grate or grind one's teeth in the face of another. Today, one understands grating the teeth causes more harm to the one grating than to the one to whom it is directed. Dental science has improved. So we see this as hurting the actor more than the recipient. But there are more modern expressions of utter disdain that express the same attitude here. And these modern physical expressions of contempt also might cause more harm to the actor than to the intended recipient. We sometimes make our hearts hard by harboring animosity. Another ungodly physical reaction is turning aside and refusing to care. Rather than expressing ourselves physically and compassionately by helping others, we may choose to walk away from suffering people. We determine in our minds they are unworthy of our time. Thus, we refuse to lend a hand. We turn away from the needy and choose not to get involved in their pain. We've all done that, haven't we, in our lives? The groupthink of his enemies caused David to feel even more isolated. It was not a single person who shunned him, but a congregation, some of whom didn't even know him. They banded together in a pact to compound his pain. They did the popular thing rather than the right thing. That's the way of the world, isn't it? To do the popular thing rather than what's right. Because usually doing the right thing is hard, isn't it? And you go against the rest of the world and what's popular or politically correct at the time. Surely we can learn a lesson from these enemies on how not to treat others. Christians are called to express love to everyone, even our enemies. Jesus said, "But I say to you who listen, love your enemies. Do what is good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." God is our model for conduct. God is the standard, isn't He? We must follow and obey Him rather than copying uncaring people. That's important, isn't it? We follow God, don't we? Not the ways of the world or the trends of the world or what's popular at the time. We are called to follow God, aren't we? In His way. David's situation was difficult. It was, wasn't it? We've all been in difficult situations. The ones who were seeking to kill him were the very ones he cared for the most. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? We've already noted the relationship between Saul and David. Not only had David served Saul closely, his best friend was Saul's son, Jonathan. But David had also been a military leader for Saul, and he had served alongside many of the soldiers who were now pursuing him. When friends or family turn on us, it can be tempting to respond in kind. I try to be nice. But if he's going to be that way, I can do it too. When Jesus spoke of loving our enemies, he said, "For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what are you doing out of the ordinary?" Even when our friends and loved ones turn on us, we don't change our tune. We are to continue loving. We are not to respond in anger or retaliation. We are to respond in love. Loving those who anger us or seek our harm is the best way to get back at them. Do not be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. That's important, isn't it? And I know each of us know from our own lives and our own personal experiences. You kill the bad with good, don't you? When somebody's boiling up a fire in anger towards you, the best way to put out that fire is with water, isn't it? You dump kindness and love and compassion on it. You don't fight fire with fire usually, because then you just got a bigger fire, don't you? You got to pour water on it. You got to be kind and loving towards that person or that situation, don't you? And I'm sure each of us are aware of that, but it's always important to remember that, isn't it? And to put it into practice. It's not always easy, isn't it? When a family member or a loved one or a coworker or something, or somebody does you wrong, you want to get back at them, don't you? Right away, you want to get back at them. But we're not to do that, are we? Step back, pause for a minute, breathe for a second, and show love and kindness towards them, and forgive them. Now, question number 3. How can we respond well when we are treated unjustly by others? Well, we were just talking about that, weren't we? When we're treated unjustly by others, treat them with kindness. Fire back with love and kindness and forgiveness. You'll surprise them. And we've all done it, I'm sure. You'll catch them by surprise. God can change their hearts. The Holy Spirit can change their hearts. If we plant those seeds and we show them respect and love and kindness and treat them how we want to be treated, even though they may not be treating us properly or fairly. Now, an alternate question here today. Who has effectively modeled for you what it means to love those who treat you unjustly? Do you know somebody that's really good at that? Maybe you're good at it yourself. It's a wonderful skill to develop, isn't it? Now, in the next verses, we see that we are to leave matters in God's hands. We can struggle with that sometimes too, can't we? Just leaving it in God's hands. Because I know, especially as guys, a lot of times, we think we got to do everything, don't we? We think we got to fix it. But leave it in God's hands. It's not always easy, is it? But that's what we need to do. Now let's touch on those last verses here this Saturday morning. Psalms chapter 35 and verses 17 through 18. Psalms chapter 35 and verses 17 through 18. Lord, how long wilt thou look on? Rescue my soul from their destructions, my darling from the lions. I will give thee thanks in the great congregation. I will praise thee among much people. David's enemies reminded him of young lions who feed on carrion. The lions were motivated only by their hunger and would not stop until the meat was gone and each had his share. This image is another way of expressing how sometimes humanity behaves like animals rather than as those made in God's image. We're tempted to consider our own needs as primary, even though others in need are nearby. Me first is the motto of many. That's the motto of the world a lot of times, isn't it? Me first, me, me, me. Fix me, and I don't care about anybody else. That's sad, isn't it? That's the way a lot of people think in the world. We probably think like that too sometimes, don't we? In the midst of his isolation, David was bold to state his impatience with the Lord. How long will you look on? Is a way of urging God to make haste and give satisfaction immediately. We want everything now, don't we? We want it right now in this world. He expressed the idea that God was looking instead of acting. Other Old Testament passages express the same idea. When we voice such words, we reflect we're locked into our own timetables and don't understand the Lord's purpose. Nor do we fully understand God's nature. And in our humanity, we often question the ways of God and the timing of God. Part of faith is to trust that God does the right thing at the right time. His ways are perfect. He is worthy of our trust. Scripture assures us that we can find mercy and grace from Him in our time of need. We have to trust in the Lord, don't we? We got to trust in God's timing. Time is important to us, isn't it? Because we are limited by time. We're only here in this world for so long. But God has unlimited time. Let's trust in Him because He created time. David had the assurance, despite his impatience and despite his doubts, that the Lord would prove Himself faithful in the end. He looked forward to the time when this unpleasantness was mere history, and he would stand to testify of God's deliverance. His faith was strong enough to overpower his doubts. His first-hand word would encourage others in their struggles. He would argue that God is indeed a God who rescues his people in their time of trouble. When he spoke from his own heart and life, others would hear and be encouraged to obey the Lord. Readers see a variety of emotions expressed in this single psalm, including anger, desperation, loneliness, impatience, and trust, representing the full range of human emotions. Some of these emotions might prompt us to act inappropriately and unwisely towards others. Thus, we learn from David that the first and best place to bring our thoughts and emotions is to the Lord. God can help us deal with our frustrations and anger when we take it to Him and leave the matters in God's hands. That's important, isn't it? We got to leave the matters in God's hands, not just keep bringing it back to ourselves and trying to take care of it ourselves. Leave it in God's hands. Saul took his hatred of David to the battlefield. He responded as a warrior, chasing the one he perceived to be his enemy to kill him. David was well known as a mighty warrior, but he appealed to God to be the warrior on his behalf. David was also appealing to God as his advocate and judge. He needed to be rescued from their ravages. Without God's intervention, David's life was truly in danger. David asked God to rescue my precious life from the young lions. Question number 4 here this morning. What makes leaving matters in God's hands so challenging? It can be challenging, can it? It can be challenging just to turn it all over to the Lord. But we're to trust the Lord, aren't we? With all of our hearts and all of our minds. Alternate question. When have you seen God glorified because someone left matters in God's hands? We've all seen those blessings, haven't we, in people's lives, and perhaps even in our own lives, when we truly just give it all to the Lord and trust in Him to take care of the matter that's at hand and the problems that we face. We also see David's trust in his praise of God. Things did not look favorable for David at the moment. He had not yet experienced the rescue he sought from God, but he approached life with a renewed determination. I will praise you, I will exalt you. David had expressed similar praise in verse 9. But here, David would offer his praise and worship in the great assembly among many people. To offer public praise in the thick of frustrating, anger-provoking circumstances is a great testimony, isn't it, of our trust in God. We honor Him when we choose to express trust rather than outrage and retaliation. Now, question number 5 here. Why is it important to take our anger and anguish to God? Well, it's important, isn't it? It's important to trust the Lord and just giving it all to the Lord. Because it doesn't work to hold on to those problems, is it? Or to bottle up those problems and that anger within our lives. Just give it to God. We got to vent to God, don't we? Before talking to others about what has upset you, talk to God. Be honest with God about why you're angry. Ask Him. Ask God for the strength to refrain from anger and the will to trust Him. Trust Him with the situation. Seek resolution, not retaliation. If possible, find a way to resolve the relationship or situation that has angered you or upset you. At the very least, pray for the well-being of the other person. As you genuinely pray for another person, God will also work on your own heart. Love, no matter what. Find specific, concrete ways you can show the love of Christ to those who've hurt you or made you angry. Don't take any action to look self-righteous and better than the other person. Show love in order to honor the one who loves you. David here had good reasons to be angry, like many of us do sometimes. We do have good reasons sometimes to be angry, don't we? He chose to take a positive route, and we can too. Take our anger to God and leave matters in God's hands. Ask God for wisdom and self-control to be able to step back when we are angry. That's important, isn't it? When we get angry, we immediately want to fire off and get mad and blow up, don't we? But it's important when we feel that anger, when we get angry, to step back. Thank Him and thank God for His Holy Spirit, who makes it possible for us to take our anger to God Himself. Aren't you thankful for that? Even through all the trials and tribulations of this world, and the things that upset us and frustrate us and make us angry, God is with us. Just take it all to God and leave it with Him. And treat others with love and compassion as we go about our daily lives. And don't let the anger just bottle up in you and swell and swell. Let go of it. Give it to the Lord. And treat each other with love. God bless you. And thank each of you for joining us this Saturday morning for our Sunday school lesson. I hope you're all staying warm here in North Carolina. It's very cold today. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Hope everybody had a wonderful and very Merry Christmas. Thank God for His Son, Jesus Christ, that He sent into the world to save us from our sins. I pray each of you stay well and have a wonderful rest of your Christmas and New Year's season. Come back and be with us next time. Love each of you and God bless you. I'll see you next time.